I just quit my
Yesterday
job.
marked exactly 1 year since I
it's
quit my
raining.
safe
My
bank.
six-figure corporate career back.
Everyone's quitting, pivoting, or starting over.
But behind every dreamy pivot is the question, how are they making this work financially?
In this video, we'll break down the different types of pivots that we're seeing, how people are actually affording it, and how you can afford one too.
There's really three types of pivots that we're seeing. And the first one is moving to a simpler life. People who are leaving corporate and going back to barista jobs, to retail jobs, to teaching Pilates, these things where it doesn't feel like their work is all consuming.
An example of this is Dollars with Drew. He quit his six-figure engineering job to work customer service for an airlines. He wasn't excited, really stressed going to work, and he just wanted to find something where he's actually excited about going to work.
Now, the second type of pivot year we're seeing is people just fully taking a career break, or some are referencing it as a sabbatical, a gap year, really just taking a year where you're not working at all. We're also seeing this a lot on the self-employed side, where people have built these big empires and then maybe decided it's not what they want to do, and so they're taking a whole year off. Another content creator, a friend of mine, has actually started making all of her content around this, how to take a career break. And we asked her, why is this so impactful to do?
The ROI isn't just in rest. It's the clarity and confidence that comes from finally hitting pause and having the time and space to consider what's next.
This to our third category, which is when people want a pivot year to make a career change, whether that's within their business, making the next business, or maybe if you're employed, making that career jump into a new field. Now, this is a type of pivot year that we've actually previously done, giving ourselves that space to figure out what we wanted to do next and build that next business. So we're going to talk about how we were able to afford to do that in a little bit.
So how do people actually afford to take a pivot year? One way you could do this is using your savings or taking from your investments. As an example of sailing with Phoenix, he liquidated his 401k, quit his job, bought a boat, and decided to sail to Hawaii.
I had a friend that was a business coach making 200K plus a year and then decided to move into the Web3 space. And so I've asked this person a lot of questions about what that pivot felt like. And what I really liked is they have this back to school mentality. When you go back to school, not only are you usually not really making money, but you're also paying for school. But instead of going to school, they just carried the costs using their savings in order to be able to make that pivot year, to just focus on really getting into that space, learning as much as possible. And so that going back to school mentality really helps when all you can see is the income's gonna drop. It's like, well, this is actually a strategic temporary pause. You're gonna learn all of these new skill sets and then go back into the workforce.
Another option you could do is light work. You could still work a little bit, just enough to pay your bills. And we were just talking about this. People are two extremes. They either think you have to just liquidate all your savings and investments, or don't slow down at all and just keep working your full-time job.
An example of this being when I was talking about going from our first business, our product business, to then moving into real estate and business coaching, we actually gave ourselves some space to figure out what that next step was, especially on my end. And so I got 2 social media contracts. I resisted the millennial urge to turn it into an entire business. And those 2 contracts meant that I could do very small amount of work because it was something I was really skilled at. So I was very efficient with it. But having those locked in contracts, I think on a 6-month or 12-month basis, really meant I was able to just breathe and take space to figure out what that next pivot was, what it was going to look like, but have a steady income during it.
For my example, I got a job at Lululemon as a sales associate, and it was in a very
affluent.
It was in a very affluent neighborhood, and the number one job of Lululemon was to connect with people, and I was able to connect with them through real estate or through hobbies and interests, and I was building my network at the same time while getting paid the retail job to keep me afloat month to month. One other option we do want to mention, it's to maintain status quo and sprint. Now, we do want to preface, this is not necessarily a pivot year, but it will allow you to eventually pivot.
Yeah, an example being her first 100K, Tori Dunlap, a friend of ours, she built that business while she kept her full-time job as long as she could. And then when she made the jump, at that point, it was a full-fledged business. So we've talked a little about how people afford these gap years, these pivot years. But now we're actually going to help you make a plan of how to afford yours.
The first step is identifying what kind of pivot you're craving. Are you opting out of your career, going for a more simple life like Dollars with Drew? Are you taking a break like sailing with Phoenix? Or are you building the next thing like what we're doing?
So once you know what type of pivot you're craving, that's going to help answer a lot of the following questions. Think about what you want out of that year. So define what this year is really for. How do you want to feel by the end of the year? And what am I setting myself up for, if at all? Right? So maybe there's no next step. There's just the year off and then letting yourself figuring it out by the end of the year. Like maybe you're not setting yourself up, and that's important to know. Or maybe you are trying to set yourself up. Like we talked about us a little bit. This is the year we're really, building this community and focusing on how are we putting ourselves closer to that next chapter.
Step 2 is knowing your numbers, aka your reality check for your runway. So we're gonna start with the biggest thing first, and that is your expenses. How much are you spending every single month? This is everything from housing, grocery, transportation/car costs,
gym memberships, literally everything.
Everything. And if you're a business owner, you will have to include your costs for running your business as well. Next, you have to look at how your expenses will change in your pivot year. For example, if you sell everything you own, you might not have rent or home internet anymore, but you're gonna have hotel and Airbnb fees or even flights.
And as Josh said before, you want to think about your business expenses as well. Someone we haven't touched on yet as an example is Matt Diavella, who took a break from YouTube and used to have a larger YouTube team. And then when he came back, he went back to solopreneur side of things. So that's an example where if he was writing out his expenses for his business, maybe he had a team of I'm not sure how many, but planning for that pivot year, you know that expense is going to drastically drop if you're no longer making videos and having a whole team work on them.
Now that we looked at your expenses, how they change in your pivot year, the last thing with your expenses is trying to figure out what you're willing to change with your expenses to bring it down even lower.
You don't have to go full ramen noodles, but some examples could depend on how big of a change this is going to be and also how your life is affected. For example, we have a car, but living in Toronto, we don't use it as much. So that's something we've lightly talked about is if it made sense to get rid of it. For us, it doesn't. We travel back to our hometown a lot, but it's important to look at, are there other things that you're willing to give up or change, maybe using your condo gym instead of the expensive gym membership. It really depends on what luxuries you want to maintain.
There are 3 areas you could look at to lower your expenses. The biggest one is gonna be housing. Next, you wanna look at your everyday spending like subscriptions and groceries and shopping. Lastly, you have your luxuries like your house cleaner, restaurants, concerts, that kind of stuff. Now that you've done all that, you will have your expenses per month. And to figure out what your runway is or what runway you need is you take that amount and you'd multiply it by 12, and that'll be the total amount you need for the year to take your pivot.
And then the last part of knowing your numbers is just getting a pulse check on how much do you have in savings, in your emergency fund, and how much do you have invested. Don't worry yet if you're not sure if you want to touch that stuff or not, just get it noted down of what you have for each. Step 3 is building your actual plan and making the decision of how you want to cover your pivot year. The first option is using your savings or investments, and this is going to be a great one if you've decided you don't want to be doing any work during that year.
You always want to start with your savings. Is this amount enough for you to cover your whole pivot year? Are you okay with your pivot year maybe being a little bit shorter? You might not have enough in your savings to cover that year, but maybe you have enough to cover 3 months, 6 months.
Are you comfortable using all of that savings too? Maybe you have enough to cover the year, but how will you feel if the end of the year comes and now we're sitting at 0? How does this kind of affect you after that year? And how comfortable are you with that?
If you can't cover it with your savings, you might want to look into dipping into your investments. You have to figure out how much are you willing to take? Are you okay with taking? Because when you take from investments, it'll affect you in the long term. What we like to do is we often look at a compounding interest calculator and figuring out how much, say 20, 30, 50K will affect us down the road with different timestamps. We'll look at if we take 50K today, how will it affect us in 10 years, 20, 30 years? And are you okay with that? And if you're not, you might want to reduce that amount. But at the same time, it's not always about that end goal. You have to still live for today. It still might be worth taking that investments to pay for your pivot year.
And this comes back to that step one of knowing what the year is for. If you really need this space to rest and recharge, or even decide what you want to do next, that really is, dare I say, priceless. Now, your second option is going to be doing that light work we talked about to cover your base expenses. This is what I like to lean into. I hate tapping into savings or investments. I like to know they're there as a backup plan and maybe doing that math to know if I really needed to take from them, I could. But overall, I prefer to reduce my income while I'm building that next thing, or just taking a year to enjoy life a little bit. For most of us, that can look like bringing in anywhere from 40K to 100K. Obviously, you've done the math on your expenses, so you know what number you're gonna need. So the main question I look at with this is, how can I minimize the work that I'm doing to still have that money come in, but really reduce my capacity of how much work I'm putting in? If you're self-employed, this can look like focusing on just one revenue stream only, pouring less work into things. So for myself, I might not put the same energy into my digital products. I might host less live workshops. For me in this year of a transition, I focus on having a few one-on-one business coaching clients because I really enjoy that work and it doesn't take a lot of my calendar. So it's a great option to make sure I still have income coming in without the same work that launching a live workshop with emails and sales page, all of those things might have included in them. And if you're self-employed, I also have a reset and rebuild guide that's actually a 60-page document for those people that already are self-employed and they want to make a pivot in their business. They're not sure what that next chapter looks like. It's going to help you reduce the amount of work you're doing in your business and go through all of the steps that I talked about to help you figure out what is next so that you can fall in love with your business again. So I'll link that below for you guys.
You could also look into earn to learn. I know I've seen a lot of TikToks where people get a job at a coffee shop, learn how to make espressos, cappuccinos, latte, and eventually their pivot year is to open their own little mobile coffee espresso machine, right? So they're still able to earn, but at the same time, they're also learning for when they pivot.
Yeah, some other options look like dropping your hours down too. Do you have full-time work that you could switch to part-time? Can you lean into those flex things like dog walking, working retail, or as he mentioned, a coffee shop? Or a good one that we mentioned that we did previously is freelance or contract work. Can you just lock in one contract that gives you that baseline work? You can be really efficient.
And the third option is going to be a combination of both. You can pull a little bit from your savings or investments, and you could still work a little bit. You might feel more comfortable that way because you're still pulling a little bit of your cash reserve so you don't have to work as much, but at the same time, you're working a little bit so that you don't have to drain all of your savings and investment accounts.
It really just depends on the numbers you're working with and your current context. If you feel you need 100K coming in to cover you for the year, is 50 of that coming from savings and 50 coming from contracts? How easy is it for you to have 50K in contracts? Because for one person, that's a lot of work, and for someone else, maybe it's not so much.
And step 4, creating a safety net. You want to create a safety net for the what ifs. What if it doesn't work out the way you want it to? And how can you mitigate those risks and figure out what's next?
Or if you're someone like myself, having the safety net is a big part of the plan. I usually am not going to use the safety net, but it allows me to move forward with my nervous system a little more regulated, knowing I have more options. I have a plan A, B, C, whatever it might be.
Do you get a new job? How quickly can you get a new job? Is there people in your sphere that can help support you in the event that you need additional support?
Where would you go if you run out of money? Are you able to nab another contract? Are you able to tap into more of the savings or investments than you had planned? What are those backup options that you have available?
And truly, I feel like if you do end up failing, you're gonna learn so much about yourself, and we just wanna help reframe that to, if everything goes wrong, you still won't regret doing it because you learned so much.
As we mentioned, we're going through a pivot year ourselves. So if you guys have any questions about how we're navigating that, or if you want to see more of the behind the scenes, it intimidates me a little to share, but we're totally open to it.
Leaving a comment or even clicking that subscribe button can really help us grow our community and our channel. We really want to make a space for like-minded individuals, and it goes a long way with the YouTube algorithm, so we would really appreciate it.